real quick. So Friday, October the 3rd, the judge will be handing down Diddy's sentence. And I'm going to play this clip here.
Okay, here we are, Matthew Russell Lee, Inner City Press, here at the Southern District of New York Courthouse. Today, Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. Now, tomorrow will be the sentencing. At least it will commence. We'll get to that in a moment. Of Sean Diddy Combs. And yesterday we covered it. The filings have gotten fast and furious. First, Combs' lawyers opposed Mia, who testified at the trial under a pseudonym. They called it, Combs' lawyer Agnifilo said it was under a false name and said a number of other things, to which the government responded this was unprofessional, victim shaming. Things got pretty extreme. But then, near midnight, Brian Steele, one of Combs' 8 lawyers, the man from Georgia, had a cover letter and a number of further letters of support, and they were a doozy. One was from Gina, who was going to testify at the trial and didn't, and now she says he shouldn't go to jail, he's not so bad, that the prosecutors tried to talk her into being a victim. She doesn't feel like a victim. You can find the letter. We posted them all.
Well, essentially, this was something initiated under the Biden administration. And personally, in my opinion, it was an issue of lawfare to discredit somebody who might have had very embarrassing recordations of some people high in the Democratic Party who were seeking office or position at the time. So they also had Homeland Security serve the search warrants in California and Florida instead of the FBI, so they could get away with evoking some of the Patriot Act stuff and keep him held incommunicado so he couldn't embarrass anybody. So he got convicted of Mann Act violations, which is essentially transporting females across state or international lines for what used to be illicit purposes, now expanded to consider prostitution. But the way it's worded and the way it can be applied is it would cover material you can get on Pornhub quite easily, or you can see for $4.95 at a major hotel or motel, or you can get on Comcast Xfinity and watch Ray J and Kim do their thing.
Well, here's the thing. So Sean Combs, it says the sentence will be Friday, October 3rd. The judge did not overturn his conviction. The prosecution wants 11 years. Diddy's attorney team wants time served.
14 months, which is about.
But they're hoping
that's cheaper than the average sentence.
So maybe the judge would try and meet them in the middle.
No, it's just, he doesn't have the option of meeting them in the middle. He has guidelines, which are pretty strict in the federal system. I was getting to that. But I was trying to give people some context so they understand what they're listening to. The federal guidelines are pretty hardcore, and they give the judge very little wiggle room. So when he goes through the guidelines and he makes an assessment of what applies based on the evidence presented to him or on the record, which can be reviewed by an appellate court, that's when the sentence comes in. Now, the typical sentence is not 14 months or longer. It's about 1 year. I've represented people charged with this. So they typically got 1 year, if anything at all. And the man that set this up, well, the person that set this up, the target, was Jack Johnson, first world heavyweight champion who was black, and that was before World War I, 115 years ago, 16 years ago. And they wanted to get him for having a white wife, and she used to bring her white friends along. So he got 1 year for being the first person to be convicted of it, and he was the target of the offense. So 10 years is ridiculous. And what you were looking at was an explicit revelation of what the pimp game is about. that so many youth have been induced into fantasizing about being, oh man, it's about pimping, man. Pimp your ride, man. Pimping is a disgusting thing to be doing, and it's unmanly. It's not masculine. And frankly, it used to be in a penitentiary, the pimp sucked more dick than anybody up in there, except for the pedophiles. So now it's supposed to be glorified because 50 years of Hollywood and blaxploitation and other garbage is glorified dysfunction, and pimping is at the top of the list of stuff that's dysfunctional, that's glorified. It's horrible. We found out about Diddy having a real strong sissy side, but I mean, that's business. And, business, yeah. He wasn't the worst pimp I've ever seen.
Well,
I represented were really bad people.
Well, let's move to the sentencing, because that's.
But I don't know. In other words, let's see what the guidelines say. That's what the application of the guidelines are going to reveal.
Okay, so this is what I don't understand, because the prosecutors are asking for 11 years, so they're asking for the maximum of the guidelines, to whereas Diddy's lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, all that's bullshit. See, they're left over from Biden, Harris, and the Obama regimes. So they're loudmouth and trying to make political points. It's a bureaucracy. They know their future with the department is limited. Somebody's going to ask them for their resignation shortly because they're holdovers. And this is just what you get when you get a bureaucracy. They maintain a sense of being simpatico with whoever appointed them. And whoever comes in to trying to use the Department of Justice to bring...
What are the guidelines?
The guidelines are set up and they are very detailed. They go on for quite a bit of time, and the judge has to go through a checklist. It's like, I'm not talking about 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm talking about a whole bunch. So, we had them for the state too.
This is what I need clarity on, because one side, they're basically arguing for the minimum of the guidelines.
Yeah, but baby, it's like this. You can talk bullshit on the heavy side or on the light side. So the truth of the matter is 14 months is more time than most people have got for the offense, have gotten.
Okay, so is that a factor of how other people for the same offense were convicted in the past?
Yeah, they'd usually get about 1 year if they got convicted.
I mean, does a judge take that into consideration?
The judge no.
Okay.
And in the long term, it's got to be commensurate with what the typical sentence is for people who match the guidelines. So the guidelines it's like, were there any children involved in this? If so, how many? And in their points, just imagine it's got points. Okay, you're going down a sliding scale. Is this a person that had a position of public responsibility by dint of having a public office in which there was an expectation of trust? No, he didn't have a public office. So that doesn't go in, but if it did, like this person was elected as governor of the state, then you say, okay, he did. And then what kind of office was it? And then there's certain points that might be attached to what the office was and how important it was for the public. Like, for example, somebody is a judge or something like that, and that's a position of public trust. What level judge was this on? What kind of impact on public confidence in government and the judiciary is reflected? You go through stuff like that. And when you get through, essentially what you do is add up the points.
Okay. And what if he is found? He is found. What if he is sentenced to the max or?
Well, if he's sentenced to the max.
My question is, can they appeal it?
Yeah. The appeal's automatic. He's going to have the appeal. There's an interesting history
Unless he's able to
behind
walk home,
why,
unless they say
but
time served. Unless they say time served, they're going to put in an appeal.
I mean, he can abandon his appeal. He's still entitled to his appeal, even if he gets time served. It's still on his record. See, so there are disabilities for a conviction for such things, and they sometimes are substantial. So the appeal's mandatory, but in the way things work, there is this thing called a motion for new trial, which can, at the judge's discretion, be set before sentencing or after sentencing.
But the judge, he said no new trial.
Set the sentencing before the motion for new trial, because the defendant may say, oh, hell, I got time served. There's no point in going through this. Save everybody the trouble. Your Honor, the defendant wishes to address the court.
The judge already ruled no new trial.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was telling you on X Space the other night, at the end of my first 8-year term as a criminal court judge, I think in the whole courthouse, in that 8 years, this was Memphis, Tennessee, where we had a huge crime problem, then worse now. And I think I'd seen maybe 2-3 motions for new trial granted in 8 years out of the thousands of trials that had occurred. I mean, it just isn't done, but it's automatic just in case. It's just part of the procedural thing. Why do we have a mandatory appeal and all of that? Well, the motion for new trial is to give the trial judge the opportunity to correct his own mistakes or errors, as they call them, without involving the appellate courts. Why do we have mandatory appeals? Ever heard of Sherlock Holmes?
Mm-hmm.
Have you?
Yes.
Okay. The person that wrote it was a guy named Arthur Conan Doyle. He was a licensed physician in England. He did volunteer work at various penitentiaries treating the inmates. He stumbled on an Indian sepoy who was convicted of second-degree murder. Dr. Doyle became concerned when he was convinced that the man was innocent. He did some research and some detective work and proved that the guy was innocent and wrongfully convicted. Now, as a result of Arthur Conan Doyle's work, now in England and in the United States, every criminal conviction is followed by a mandatory appeal. Now, of interest, if you've read Sherlock Holmes, who's his sidekick? Dr. Watson. Brilliant deduction, Holmes, brilliant deduction. I said, Watson, quite elementary. Well, see, it's a schizophrenic thing because Dr. Watson was in fact Dr. Doyle, and Sherlock Holmes was Private Detective Doyle. So he split himself up into Sherlock Holmes as the private detective and into Dr. Watson as the licensed physician. So that's why we have mandatory appeals to this day in the United States, is thanks to the guy that wrote Sherlock Holmes. It's an interesting side story.
Okay, cool. So if he is innocent, I'm not innocent, I'm sorry. If the judge comes back and says time served and he goes home, what will life be like for Diddy as far as...
We don't know because the government can appeal the sentence.
Oh. See, you ain't... Okay. So both sides could
appeal. It ain't over till the fat lady sings. And see, if the prosecution doesn't like the sentence, they can appeal it as being too lenient.
And then what happens?
It goes to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is where 4 members of the U.S. Supreme Court came from.
Oh, so this is not over.
No, it ain't over. Justice grinds slowly. You have the trial, you have the final arguments, you get the jury verdict, You get the pre-sentence or investigative report done. You either have the sentencing hearing and then the motion for new trial, or you have the motion for new trial and then the sentencing hearing, and then you have the appeal, and then it goes in the federal system to the Circuit Court of Appeals, which for this court located in New York is the Second Circuit, which sits in Washington, D.C., and scratch-head Kanye Jackson, with due respect, is from the Second Circuit, as are several other judges on the U.S. Supreme Court. And frankly, I think Justice Roger E. Clifton of the Second Circuit, great wise sister, should have been the nominee for the Supreme Court position instead of head scratching. I don't know what a woman is, but in any event, the next step after the Second Circuit is either the prosecution dissatisfied with the outcome or the defense dissatisfied with the outcome, is a petition for writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is we petition to the Supreme Court to certify that this is an important enough issue for them to hear. If they grant the writ of certiorari, then they hear it. If they don't, then that's the end of the matter.
So October the 3rd, judge issues his sentencing. And it's basically the end of a new beginning.
The beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
Churchill said.
Okay, that was Churchill. Okay. I had it backwards. And okay,
this is not the end. This is not, they said, this is not the beginning. This is not the end, but it is the beginning of the end, something along those lines.
So in other words, whatever the judge says tomorrow, this case is going to be carried on throughout the rest of this year.
Yeah, and remember, the prosecution wants 10 years. They want to make an example because they're pushing the feminist point. My summation of the feminist point is this, and I've said it before, on a civil matter, let's just take the O.J. Simpson case. He got acquitted in the criminal trial, but that had no bearing on the civil case. Now, Nicole Simpson's family and Rod Goldman's family, you know how many years they had to file a civil action?
How many?
2. Statute of limitations ran after 2 years. But in California, if you squeeze somebody's ass, you have 25 years.
Oh, wow. But a murder, 2 years.
2 years. See, that's how out of whack it is. And that's why you get there. We want 11 years to make an example of him. Well, all well and good, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater by destroying the theoretical foundation or the philosophical or the logical foundation for everything else you're doing. I understand why they're doing it, but I mean, the law requires a consistency.
Right.
It's like, for a while, there was a big problem in criminal justice in the 1980s. You know why? Because the Constitution says you have a right to confront your accusers, to cross-examine the witnesses against you, to exercise the subpoena powers of the court to compel production of evidence and attendance of witnesses in your own behalf, should you choose to put on proof. But you are not required to put on proof. You may remain silent, and that cannot be held against you. So when you said if it's a sex crime, you don't have a right to confront your accusers, what does that say about the whole constitutional scheme? You have a right to be present during the course of all proceedings and be represented by counsel. You are entitled to a public and speedy trial before a jury of your peers, and a right to confront and cross-examine your accusers. So if you take that away, what did you just do to the whole constitutional scheme?
One more question. October 3rd, judge hands in his sentencing. If he says time served, right, he could walk and go home. But prosecutors are going to send an appeal.
Yeah,
Now,
they're going to raise hell about they need to keep him on the same bond and all this other stuff,
so
or
here's
no
my question.
bond because they
Wait,
want
wait,
to
wait.
appeal it.
Here's my question. When the prosecutors issue their appeal, does he sit in jail, or is he?
That's what I was just talking about. In other words, the prosecution will be raising hell about he needs to be kept in jail, no bond until the appeal is resolved, or the government will be opposed by the defense saying, Your Honor, since it's time served, there's no reason not to have a bond. You know where we saw this?
Where?
The Cosby trial.
Oh, good point. Okay, so just quickly walk
Why
us.
didn't it's a 3-year sentence? That's what Cosby got. So the judge was supposed to have his report in 60 days. He took almost 11 months to purposely, I think, delay so Dr. Cosby would sit in jail because his wife was the judge's wife was a staunch feminist and wanted him to do time. So they delayed. And as you know, since we've talked to his representative, and Dr. Cosby, I know I talked to him personally. He said they kept offering me, if I just abandoned my appeal, they'd let me out within 3 days. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So he stayed in all that time when the appellate court for the state said this is absolutely ridiculous. There is no way in hell this man should have even been prosecuted because the prosecutor's office violated the most fundamental principles of American law and then doing it. Right. See, what did I say? The Fifth Amendment, this isn't going to stand because they got him they compelled him to testify because one DA said there is absolutely no liability. We don't intend to prosecute. And then after he had been compelled to testify in a civil matter, the new DA said, screw that. We're going to go prosecute him anyway. I said, you can't do that.
Okay, so let me just get this straight. Judge, October the 3rd, in the Diddy case, if the judge says time served, prosecutors at that very moment is going to say our appeal and he should not have the bond, yada, 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 yada. So that means the judge is going to have to make another decision to either side with right there.
I've been in that position. It gets complicated. It isn't like you see in the movies where everything the judge says 10 words and that's it.
But everybody who's watching this, they're thinking of it as the movies.
Yeah, why do you think I'm doing this? Now, the truth of the matter is, how many former TV judges do they have involved in this process now? A handful? How many of them have been doing it for 45, 50 years like I have? One, me.
So,
one of them they use, she was involved in the process before she got on TV for this 4 or 5 years.
So even if the judge says time served, he may well still be sitting in prison.
Yes.
This is a wacky case.
Exactly. That's why it's so crazy. That's why they have the term lawfare. Lawfare back up 200 some years to 1791. They passed the Bill of Rights to keep lawfare from happening. So these clowns with the Biden administration and a prosecutorial staff, a U.S. attorney selected by Biden-Harris, and a big staff, a lot of whom came in under Obama boy, they decided they were going to protect their political party with whom they empathized and sympathized and supported. They were going to silence somebody who might have some very bad things to say about somebody who hypothetically may have been running for U.S. president, who is known to get a freak on every now and then. And these tapes that they seized went back 15 years. So they brought in Homeland Security, not the FBI, to serve the search warrants, so they could evoke the Patriot Act and keep him incommunicado, and have a heightened criteria for setting bonds. Anybody that's offering a $50 million bond on something where the maximum sentence he could get, if you listen to the feds, was 11 years. And remember, they aren't in power anymore. There's a new administration in. And he might get as little as 14 months, and $50 million wasn't enough to secure that after he moved from an island with no extradition agreement with the United States back to continental USA, and then secured a residence in New York so he could be near the trial. And $50 million wasn't enough to secure that?
So one last thing here.
It stinks to high heavens. That's why we have the Bill of Rights, boys and girls. And when you saw this, you see how bad it is by all of these messes that you have in.
So one last thing here. If the judge says time served, and of course the prosecutors jump in and says, well, appeal, and we want the bond or whatever. But if the judge strikes down the prosecutor's request and he is allowed to go home, the prosecutor is still going to hand in an appeal for the judgment of the judge. Correct?
Yeah. And see, it's also going to depend on how sharp the lawyers are for sentencing. Wesley Snipes got 3 years in a federal facility for not income tax evasion. I was sitting in the courtroom when IRS offered him a $250,000 refund check because he overpaid his taxes. He was given 3 years for failure to file a complete set of tax returns. Now, you want to hear how important the lawyers in all this are to the process? We haven't heard yet. The judge is yelling at Snipes' lawyers. What the devil is wrong with you? The court is trying to grant your client some leniency. Will you give it an excuse and get to the points that you are supposed to cover in the sentencing hearing so the court can do it? And they went all off like they didn't know what the hell was going on, which I don't think they did. So the judge was practically pulling his hair out. He said, you give the court out for this.
Let's wrap this up.
The court impose the absolute maximum under the sentence because you haven't offered anything to defend your client.
So let's just wrap this up. Whether Diddy gets to go home or not on Friday, this case is not done, and Trump could possibly have some influence.
They can pardon the man.
Can pardon him. So Trump may get involved.
Or he doesn't have to pardon him. He also has the authority to commute his sentence. 14 months, time served.
Okay. All right. That's it on the
Boom. And it might be accompanied by a deal if he comes out and tells us what they were really after him.
Okay.
That might be advantageous.
Because the tapes the tapes is in Trump's custody.
Yeah, and by the way, the U.S. Supreme Court, the current Chief Justice, wrote an opinion in 1989 that said under American constitutional law, the Department of Justice is under his umbrella. The Attorney General for the United States is his secretary, a cabinet secretary. So he has the right under the Constitution to consult with, advise, counsel, talk to, suggest, and urge prosecutions and how they come. so he can get involved. The Democrats are trying to act like he's doing something illegal. But Justice Roberts, who is the current Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, already wrote an opinion, and it cited with favor another case saying he can do that. So, yeah,